Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Ken Wood, who's EVP of Product Management at Descartes. And today we're going to talk about AI innovations in global trade intelligence technology. So, global trade management has always been a highly complex, risky, and strategic business process, despite it being historically underappreciated at most companies. However, if there's one good thing about kind of the tariff wars that we're in at the moment is that, it's put the spotlight on global trade management and in particular in the role and importance of global trade intelligence technology. So, what is global trade intelligence? How is AI transforming the way organizations manage cross-border trade? What are some concrete use cases, and how are GTI solutions delivering business value? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to address in today's episode, and it's great to have Ken on the program to share his insights and advice on this topic. So, Ken, welcome to the program.
Yeah, it's great to be back with you again, Adrian. Excited for the conversation. It's been a minute, so it's good to be back on the program.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a long time, and for those of you who may not remember or probably even know, Ken and I go way back. And in fact, Ken was one of my original logistics leaders for Type 1 diabetes cure team members, where we cycled in Death Valley, and we survived to talk about
Barely,
it.
barely in my
Barely
case,
survived to talk about, it, which
barely
is why I wore
survived.
this cycling shirt in honor of Ken. So
Yes.
that was back in 2016. So it's been quite some time. So anyway, I'm gonna have to get Ken back on his bike and maybe drag him kicking and screaming back to Death Valley at some point. So.
Can maybe can we pick a different place?
Anyway, that'll be a different episode, a
Yeah,
different conversation. Today we're going to talk about global trade intelligence. So, in case people are not familiar with GTI, Global Trade Intelligence
yeah,
Solutions, I mean, can you give an overview of what these solutions are and what they
right.
do? And then of course, because everything these days, AI, whenever we talk about any kind of technology, AI is woven into it. I mean, what role is AI playing in helping companies navigate, today's, again, increasingly
Yeah,
complex and
sure.
risky global trade environment?
Yeah, so maybe start with a foundation for, what does global trade intelligence mean in the context of, at least our version of the conversation around it in the portfolio. You can think about it as the intersection of content, and I'll explain more about what that means, tools in some cases, and then, in other cases, full stacks of technology to support or underpin, international trade activity, right? And uh, for our customers, it can run the gamut of, what I need is the duties, tax, and tariff table content for these 50 countries that I trade with. And that gets plugged into my global trade management system where I'm managing the life cycle from, procurement through sales for those goods. For others, it's like, well, I might not have a full stack global trade management system in place, and I need some content plus a handful of tools, whether they're expressed through APIs or if they're things for, more limited functions, like maybe a product classification function for trade purposes, looking at a good and saying, all right, what's the HTS code associated with it for any given country. And then for other customers, it might involve something that operates where they need help in operating a more fulsome stack of, I am running export controlled goods processes, and I need a full workflow for managing goods that are subject to that kind of regulation, like ITAR and other programs, where you have to be pretty diligent about managing and providing the backdrop of how you got to the determination and applied for the license, and looking at each export and things like that. So, and then there's another dimension for us to it, and it's not just about the process and the content. There's also an entire library that goes with it, that comes from public data sources, that allows you to look at global trade flows and activity, right? So you can start to, in some cases for our customers, look at not just rules and regulations, but also sources and activity levels associated with goods using, what we call the data mining connection with some of these other tools.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last point that you brought up is particularly important today, right? When
Yep.
because as a result of these tariffs, companies are looking for alternate sources of supply, right? Where are they, if I need
Yep.
part a particular type of part or component or a particular raw material, looking at that global trade data to understand, okay, where else are, who are the leading exporters of
Yep.
these types of goods, right? So that implies that there are suppliers in those countries, in those
So,
areas that they can source from.
so we really started seeing, I think, uptick, go back to Trump 45, continuing through Biden, now re-accelerating again, patterns changing in sourcing, either, for diversification reasons. I'm sole sourcing through a country now where there's the potential of, trade conflict associated with tariffs go up, whatever. I mean, it's just a riskier scenario. So for a lot of our customers, it's not just about reshoring or nearshoring. It's just diversifying their, trade sources in general. And then, the other thing that we've seen where we get plugged into platforms and solutions that those customers are, start, I think, showing more interested in is, what you might refer to as supply chain risk management and supply chain mapping platforms where, customers are looking and saying, all right, I don't know what I don't know in some cases as I dig down through the tiers of my supply chain. And then they want to interleave content, whether it's trade content or whether it's sanctions content or, it's, I can do business with them, but what are the rules and what am I going to pay? Or I shouldn't be doing business with them and I need to find an alternative source that's not sanctioned, right? And all those things for us kind of link together from a content, tooling, and platform standpoint, plus with important partner platforms where we manifest some of that content. And
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think, one of the things I know going back to when I used to do market studies on global trade management years ago, what I always would tell, companies, users is that, global trade management is more than just the software, right? It's more than
yep,
just, unlike let's say just a transportation management system or warehouse management system, everything, one of the key critical areas of a global trade management solution is the content piece, right? It's the
yeah,
data, the intelligence piece. And as you mentioned today, it's that's a very broad set of, when we talk about intelligence, when we talk about content, it's a very broad set of data, information, insights that get woven into these solutions, whether it's the ones you bring to the table or even plugging into partner
that's right.
solutions that need that data, that information to ultimately inform the business processes that software is going
That,
to
that, that,
help automate.
well, that's right. And some of it is so mundane. You think about, how droll can this get? It, it gets as basic as customs exchange rates, like trying to go out and source customs exchange rates for different countries in order to know, what your financial, run the calculations to understand your financial exposure for import export activity. It's not trivial.
Right.
Right, because it's not all packaged up ready to go from most governments for you in a easily consumable friendly way. And that's where, we kind of break our pick at the fundamental level of just going out and doing the unglamorous work of collecting and transforming and then making available, on a data as a service or a publication basis, just reams of content, right? Tariffs, duties, taxes, free trade agreements, exchange rates, go on down the line, right? And then making that available to customers in whatever manner they need to consume it.
Right.
And as we get into the topic of AI, right? I mean, it can get as simple as advances in the tooling associated with natural language processing, to be able to, streamline some of that process that, formerly required heavy duty human interpretation of content sources and in some cases translation of content into something that's much more efficient.
Yep. So let's dive into some of these, some concrete use cases that, some of our people in the audience might be familiar
Yeah,
with or have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Started with, denied party screening, which is, again, a very critical compliance
yeah.
function. So how is AI, building upon what you just said, how is AI kind of transforming denied party screening today, and what kind of tangible results or benefits our company is achieving?
Yeah, so we've been in the game of doing denied party screening sanctions analysis for quite some time, and we've had different heuristics over the years, linguistic distance type algorithms and things like that that we've used, as well as some other techniques. And what we have experienced is a lot of it has to do with source data quality. Your match is only going to be as good as what you get from the sources and what's written on the manifests and things like that. But what we have seen by utilizing what's come out of innovation starting in the late, from Google research 2018 beyond, what ultimately became the transformer model that's been used by OpenAI and others for the current Gen AI revolution. We've utilized some of that technology to advance the accuracy through much better contextual understanding and natural language processing of, I've got a name, I've got an address. Let's say it was Adrian Gonzalez is on the sanctions list, but Adrian Gonzalez, with the C version of it, is the one who's showing up on the shipment. You both live in Boston. It gets very nuanced in trying to understand what is a good match and what isn't a good match, in ways that traditional algorithms can only take you so far on. And this is one of the things that's, I think Gen AI, and as it gets more and more advanced, really has a lot of potential around, is better understanding the context and the nuance associated with the entirety of the shipment context, as well as the data that you just see on the name and the address. And we've been able to make some progress on that have seen substantial reductions in false positive hit rates for customers, and we see more room to run with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the areas, particularly with, the false positives that has historically been,
Yeah,
challenging and time-consuming process,
yeah,
altogether. I mean, another area that I'm seeing AI playing a role is kind of in using agents, right? So there's a lot of buzz today around
yeah,
agentic AI, right? But it's in kind of using agents to build complex global trade intelligence, queries. Can you explain how these AI-powered agents work in the context of,
yeah,
again, what we're talking about here with global trade, and what
yeah.
values, again, do they bring to global trade management professionals?
Well, I just, at the 10,000 foot level, I think there is so much room to run in logistics, supply chain, trade for the agentic model of AI deployment. We're just on the front end of that, I think, as an industry. It's all about the context, giving the agent access to the context of the applications and the workflow to be able to do things on your behalf, and obviously having the confidence in being able to manage it in a way that it's not going to do something that's detrimental to the business. So for us, where we're starting with some of these agentic workflows, isn't about execution, but it's about insights and management. I'll call it meta processes associated with it, just to be able to say, "Hey, what's going on?" or "What do you see here?" And one of the things that we have deployed is with our trade intelligence database. Instead of users who they have a business goal in mind that shows me who are the three suppliers of these HTS codes, top three suppliers of these HTS codes worldwide in this time frame. Uh, there's a way to do that with querying and UIs, but for some users who don't spend all day sitting in application UIs and understanding how to manage the ifs, ands, ors, contains type of queries, they're looking for quick answers to questions and then being able to put them in the context. And it veers into the realm of what I would refer to as conversational analytics and insights, so that you can just say, "Tell me, this is what I'm after. Give me what I need, please." "Oh, okay. Now here's my next question." And immediately in that context, "Okay, now show me the chart of that over the last 3 years of, the volume from that supplier on these trade lanes." It just becomes a much more natural interaction with a business user who's trying to achieve an outcome versus struggling with an application UI or struggling with an analytics tool where the report almost gives you what you want, but not quite. And then, answering those downstream questions becomes difficult. And that becomes just a very kind of, I don't want to say magical, but kind of, very natural process of just asking questions to an AI led uh, uh, deployment of the tool that removes the barrier of the user interface. The classic kind of WIMP paradigm of windows, icons, menus, blah blah blah. Right, the thing that we've been living with for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's interesting because I love kind of the approach you've taken because when I think of agents historically, at least now in these early, like you said, it's still relatively early stages. I mean, a
Yep.
lot of the focus and discussion at least has been on, hey, it's about automating workflows and automating decision making, if you will, and basically having kind of an AI coworker that's
Yep.
you've offloaded tasks to do, and they're going to go and run with it. What you've talked about here in many ways is just a different user interface. If I mean, I know I'm simplifying it a bit here, but it's really a way to really mine this wealth of data and intelligence and doing that in a much more natural conversational way, in a much more accessible way, perhaps, and easier to train and so forth. Because to your point, it's just a way of really what you really have to know is knowing what questions to ask and how to ask them. But if you
Sure.
now know what questions to ask and how to ask them and what follow-up questions to ask to have that intelligent conversation with the agent, you can really, extract insights and be able to get the information you need to make faster, smarter decisions, as we always talk about. So this is really a way to, transform the user experience behind business intelligence and analytics.
Yeah, and I think that's an easy place to start. Easier place to start, right? The trust and tolerance levels are a little different, right? And we can all learn a little bit through that process and get customers accustomed to a paradigm. But at the end of the day, I think we all experience this, right? When we're interacting with software and technology, sometimes the user interface stands in the way of the capability or the content and the intent or need of the user. And I think this is a way of trying to change and modify that paradigm. And at the end of the day, they'll work in concert, I believe. But we have some other solutions outside of the global trade space where we have some very high end kind of rules management capabilities that it's just not easy, for they're capable, but you have to invest the time and effort in understanding and getting to proficiency. Why can't you just talk your way into this is what I'd like to achieve and let the agent create the rule configuration and the process automation and workflow for you, and you don't need to worry about the logic model that's been exposed in an application in order to achieve that, right? And I
Right.
think we'll see a lot more of that.
So let's talk now about, and this is an area that particularly with the tariffs is getting a lot of attention today, and that's product classification. In fact, I
Right.
saw an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was either today or yesterday, about ways that companies are trying to,
Yeah.
in some ways, game the tariff, perhaps
Sure.
by by shadowy means, let's say, or just outright illegal means by misclassifying things to try to get a lower rate. But obviously, sometimes companies just misclassify things just because they have the complexity involved. So it's not only like a very complex process, but it's also very time consuming and resource intensive too. So let's talk about how AI is transforming the classification process, and again,
Yeah.
what benefits are companies seeing in terms of speed,
Yep.
accuracy, and productivity.
Well, I think that uh, maybe the place to start on that is the whole classification process is underpinned by very, very large uh, content repositories, starting with World Trade Organization data, and then moving downstream into country-specific implementations or interpretations of that tariff to get to a full characterization of what the HS code for the importation of your bicycle T-shirt into the United States was. Right. So moving from 6 digits and then beyond, right up to 10 digits of classification. And there's an interpretation process to that, right? You've got to understand what has to come together. I need a good description of what that is. I need to have a good description of where it came from. I need to have a good description of its packaging because sometimes that matters. Is it a bulk or is it an individual? Um, what is it made of? It matters whether or not it's cotton or cotton blend or wool or and then where's it coming from? It just starts getting very deep, right? And then you intersect that with as we have a you know a, a dynamic trade regulation environment. I'll put it that way, right? You're constantly looking at how tariffs stack on top of each other, right? Because these things are additive in some cases. So you're constantly, I think, to the point you're making, is the incentive has been heightened to go back and look at classification decisions more carefully for customers where opportunity exists because there's nuance and judgment in the classifications process, right? So one of the things that you know large language models and Gen AI is good at is looking at and understanding contextual needs that continually are getting better at that, and understanding the description, the totality of the description versus the totality of what's in the regulations through the various chapters and whatnot, and giving you a pretty good answer, right? Or at least at the initial classification level. And this always remains human supervised in our world, right? It's a way to jumpstart that process and quickly get to a point where a seasoned trade professional can look at it and say, yep, I understand the logic of how it got to here. It looks like it's referencing the right chapters inside the tariff. And yep, I'm good with that. Let's go. Or, okay, I need to make a few point changes, but you're trying to do a little more managing of the exception and supervising that new employee, so to speak, that we were talking about, right? Because the trajectory that I think we're firmly on here is that knowledge encapsulated in these models is growing exponentially right now. Like all of us are going to have access to like the smartest PhD student in any subject matter area, on our devices, but they don't have the context of your business, right? And that's like a new smart employee out of university. You still have to supervise and show them the ropes of how things get done in the business, but they come in with a high level of technical and general knowledge capabilities, right? And that's what we're trying to bring into the into the world for our customers, is in the context of the business system that they use for the classification, bringing those capabilities intersected with supervised processes and veracity of result to be managed to accelerate classification. And this happened. This trajectory was happening even before the dynamic trade environment. If you think about the rise in international e-commerce, think about what happens on all the international e-commerce platforms that are seller diverse. Somebody needs to figure out the classification of those things, but you're not dealing with a static product catalog,
Right.
right? And you're not dealing with sellers in some cases that are trade experts. So, brokers somewhere along the lines through a combination of manual and automatic processes that ultimately have to be supervised and verified by a licensed custom broker need to work through much more quickly that classification process. And, utilizing AI tools has done some really interesting things for us with some customers.
I think, and I like how you said in terms of, the context of your specific business and product
Yeah.
catalog is important because if you're a company that's continuously introducing new products, new
Yep.
styles, new flavors of the same thing,
Yep.
that's important to kind of incorporate into these models and into the technology because it'll get you to that classification much faster because, hey, this is very similar or almost exactly the same as the
Yeah.
product we released 6 months earlier, except now it's maybe we added an extra widget or we changed the color or we added some new electronic capabilities, which obviously might change the classification, but at least you're getting to that classification much faster than if you're just starting from scratch. But
That's
it learns from basically the previous classifications
that's right.
to help you get there faster.
And we're taking both approaches, and there's a couple of things I want to touch on. We're taking both approaches. Like we aren't using customers' data to improve a general classification model, right? It's their data, their business processes, their approach to classification kind of matters in that. But we approach it two ways, right? There's a generally trained model that understands the world of like the trade published trade tariff catalog, and then and it's not bad, but then there's a refinement process that stays within the realm of our customers' data domain and their curated classification decisions that a subset of the model is trained just for their specific scenario, and if they have any special sauce that doesn't get leaked into any other customer's classification process. And back to the comment that I had about like the mundane things that cause problems in this world. These tools are good at pointing out things that need to be done before you ever get to the stage of classification. Like, is the description that you have sufficient to even start a classification process? Because maybe you need to solve an upfront problem with the supplier or the buyer inside your organization that says, hey, the 3 word description that doesn't require AI, but this description, this ridiculously short and vague description that you gave me that's missing anything associated with weights, measures, packaging associated with these goods isn't sufficient, right? Before it ever gets to this kind of precious resource of the person who understands classification, there's the potential to push the problem upstream in a more automated fashion for clearing the decks of insufficient insufficiently described goods and such things before you get to that stage using agents and bots.
Yeah. So afraid all kinds, FAK, no longer good enough.
Well, it's one of the things that there was a crackdown on that was announced, even into last year, which with e-commerce imports and other types of imports, like the US CBP announced that they were going to really, ramp up the pressure on. I'd say it's particularly egregious in e-commerce for some of the things that reasons we discussed before, right? The people who are putting the listings in the stores aren't experts in trade, and if they put in t-shirt and that ends up being what's on the manifest that ultimately is in a broker's hands and then makes its way through to CBP, they're essentially saying, hey, yeah, time out, that's not good enough. And there have been some fines associated with that.
Right, right. So let's look ahead now. I mean, we could probably spend, I mean, there's
Yeah,
so much subtopics to this whole realm that we could easily
sure.
spend all day, talking about it. But let's like, look ahead towards the future a little bit. I mean, how do you see AI driven innovation continue in global trade intelligence, and what future capabilities are on the horizon?
Yeah, well, I think that there's going to be a lot of there's a lot of data out there, business data, transaction data, intersecting with regulatory uh, environment data, and I think that back to the comment about risk management, risk analysis, I think there's a lot of room to run with AI, trying to automate the pulse of trying to raise for customers either opportunities or risks that exist within their supply chain. Right? It's a analyst, all-seeing analyst that never sleeps potentially in terms of monitoring activity in the supply chain. And there's some things that we're working on that front. There's other examples like if you're going to be in this dynamic trade environment where every other week there's a new trade deal announced and rescinded, looking at things like free trade qualifications, and understanding a bill of material and how subtle adjustments to bill of materials perhaps would allow you to qualify for different trade treatment is ripe for AI use cases, and then I think more generally, just in back to what I was commenting on, I think that the nature of the user experience and the role of a trade professional in all of this is going to change a little bit, where they're supervising these processes, and human in the loop I think is always going to be required, and in some cases required from a regulatory standpoint, depending on which process you're talking about. But it's going to extend the scalability of these handful of people in the world that we have that really understand trade management processes, allow them to become probably more effective, and change the user experience over time of how we interact with the tools, where you're talking and directing and observing results and intervening as necessary, but you're not clicking and popping your way through these traditional application UIs, and we'll see more of that over time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And particularly, I think of all the places, I think in supply chain management where human in the loop is, I think, very critical is going to be in this
Yeah,
area because, again, the risk, the both legal and financial is just so big
yeah,
that,
that's right.
there's a level of trust that you need to develop, as we talked about earlier, you brought up earlier in terms of with these tools in general. But I think ultimately there's going to have to be either because it is mandated that there has to be a human that signs off on this ultimately, because if there's something wrong,
That's right.
ultimately,
But
someone has to answer, for it.
And I think there's some different this in this area in particular because most trade management professionals and brokers that I talk to take their role very their fiduciary responsibilities very seriously, right? There's a hurdle here that has to be overcome in terms of trust and transparency associated with that, and that's something that we're all going to have to keep in mind as we're trying to advance the state of the art, utilizing AI. But it's incumbent upon us to put the right tools and checkpoints in place to allow that trust and transparency to be validated. But at the end of the day, it's not that dissimilar to I've just hired a new employee. Do I turn them loose on their own? Right. And
right.
it's in some sense, it's almost like the self-driving car thing for me, Adrian, where the statistics show that they're safer than human drivers, but we still need to get to that point, in some cases of believing and trusting it, right? We've got to be able to touch and feel it ourselves. And that's probably going to be a curve that we're going to be on from a trade intelligence, trade management, artificial intelligence standpoint too, right? It took a long time to get to a point where people are like, okay, let's go turn autonomous cars loose in Los Angeles and Austin and all these other places. And I do think we'll get there, but we've got to build, we got to earn the right and build the tools and show the like I said, the transparency and the results to get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. So, Ken, as a way to kind of wrap up, I mean, if I'm a global trade management, professional, I need to sell my CEO and CFO and investing on AI-enabled, global trade intelligence. I mean, what are and we've kind of covered these already throughout our conversation here, but to boil it down, I mean, what are the 3 to 5 business benefits I should highlight? And what's my elevator pitch then?
Well, I think it's going to be a little dependent on what your role is in the business. Like if you're in the process of doing trade management activities on behalf of customers, right? You're doing this as a service, as a consultant, a broker, or whatever. Uh, you should be able to do more business. For the same input, you should be able to do a lot more output in terms of generating new business and revenue and profits for your organization. And the pitch is really about, you know, uh, in human intensive services oriented logistics activities, uh, being able to scale beyond your ability to put a new human in a seat. Like, yep, you've got a lot of smart people, allow them to do more and generate more profit for that service providing business. I think is the elevator pitch that is here and is going to be coming. And if you're inside a shipper organization, right? You're a retailer, manufacturer, distributor, you're talking about global trade intelligence. It's going to all boil down to more more flexible supply chain, right? Velocity and sourcing and intelligence and understanding risk, opportunity and risk in the supply chain, and then being able to operationalize that, right? And there's a linkage here where a lot of the friction that exists in the world of international logistics is between the supplier, the buyer, and the broker. Throw a forwarder in the mix too for some of the transportation related things and a carrier. And there's still a lot of handoff human based activity there, right? That exists. Of here's my spreadsheet, or here's this, or here's that. AI is going to help us solve a lot. I think part of what we're going to see, and I'm getting off the elevator pitch, but part of what we're going to see is AI is going to be able to intersect into these existing streams of interaction without total systems transformation, because they're going to be able to substitute or augment the human understanding and rekeying of the intent of the email or the spreadsheet into action with whatever system you have in place, right? And that's just going to achieve greater velocity in the supply chain and lower costs. And back to the elevator pitch for the internal shipper type scenario. Hey, better, faster compliance, more opportunity for savings potentially on importation costs through sourcing alternatives, and better classification decisions that are more dynamic, right? Where something doesn't sit in the catalog for years with the same classification that's never discovered in terms of an alternative.
Wow. I think, of all the places where we talk about AI and supply chain management, I mean, obviously AI, a lot about AI,
Yeah.
particularly when you're talking about, generative AI, agentic AI, you're talking about LLMs, things like that. I mean, it's so dependent on, large volumes of data and information.
Yeah.
And, this is like the perfect fit, right? Global trade management is the perfect fit for this because of
Yep.
all the data and information that is kind of relevant and required, to manage this process. And I think you covered a lot of great examples here of kind of the role that AI is going to be playing, is playing, and going to continue to play, in the
Yep.
years ahead. And one thing's for sure that this whole environment is going to continue to be complex, risky, and exciting in the weeks and months and years ahead. So,
Yep.
Ken, thank you very much for making the time to be with us, and certainly look forward to maybe having you in a future episode to kind of see where we're at and how some of these
Sure.
innovations have continued to evolve.
Well, let's not make it so long next time.
Absolutely. I want to thank
All right.
those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Descartes website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Ken, feel free to post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank
Absolutely.
you for joining us,
Thank
and
you.
look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great
All
day.
right. Take care. Bye.